Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second class in this course on, and it's called the three basic bodies, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through this course, but we're kind of working with the idea of the death process, death, intermediate state, and rebirth. And in the tantric path, of course, you use those to cultivate the causes for the three bodies. So they're kind of the basic bodies from which the three enlightened bodies are formed. So talked about that a little bit last week, but let's go ahead and start tonight, as usual, with some prayers. I'll need to do screen sharing. Great, you can set up now. Thank you. No, not quite yet. Is Bill the host tonight? Bill, can you turn on screen share for me so I can share the prayers? While Bill is there. No, not yet. You can do the claim host, Lou, and then there we go. Okay, thank you, Lou. So let's just recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. I think we did it 3 times last week. We'll just do it once, these remaining classes, and then we'll go on to the mandala offering and refuge and bodhicitta. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. So we'll do this in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Yidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then refuge, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu badu dakni kyatsu chi daki chenyan gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye duparasho sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyatsu chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Penshir Sangye Duparsho. So just a short meditation then before we begin as well. Spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath to calm the mind a bit. And then we'll set our motivation together. So again, work with the breath in whatever way you prefer in silence for the next few minutes. Now let's take a moment to set our motivation for tonight's class. And in this course, again, we're looking at this process that's going to happen to all of us. We've been through it many, many times. From death, exiting from the body, the consciousness then linking up with an intermediate state, and then linking up with a new rebirth. We're trying to gain an appreciation for not just what happens there, but the aspiration to use those times as a very powerful basis for spiritual practice. To not just remove our fear of death, but to actually have some anticipation of what can happen at death, the ability that we have to use that time to generate deep realizations. And if we're practicing Tantra, to even accomplish Buddhahood in the process of death, intermediate state, rebirth. Again, we're doing this work to examine this topic with that motivation of bodhicitta. Yes, we will attain enlightenment through practicing these teachings at the deepest level. We're attaining that state so we can benefit all beings. And as I mentioned last week, moreover, so we can benefit them very quickly, generating this unbearable compassion that cannot stand the thought that sentient beings will continue to suffer as long as we're unenlightened. We want to become a Buddha very quickly in this human life that we possess now, this very lifetime. So we then can work for sentient beings perfectly, spontaneously, effortlessly in the state of Buddhahood. To generate that motivation for being here again tonight to engage in this class, so that everything that we do, all the words we hear, all the thoughts we have, the words we say, all of this will become the cause for our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings as quickly as possible. Open your eyes fully, and we will begin. So again, in the first class, I kind of introduced this topic using some of the introduction of the book in which the translation of the text is found, this little death, intermediate state, and rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism. Fairly old book, one of the um, important books, though, in terms of explaining this whole process that is set out again in the Tantras. I think in my research, it looked like this is in the Guya Garbha Tantra, which I'm not that familiar with, but that's the basis upon which the Tibetan Book of the Dead is established, is the Guya Garbha Tantra. And so these teachings are kind of drawn from that and from the Book of the Dead, and giving us, again, the roadmap of what's all going to be happening. So let me briefly go through what we went through last week in terms of the text. It had a short introduction, but then essentially just jumped right into the text with the first of the three, the process of death. So we have this chart that I'll use initially and maybe again refer back to, but tonight in particular, we see that there are a dissolution of what are called 25 phenomena. And the first five happen with the first dissolution. And they are set out in these categories of first the aggregates, which most of you are familiar with from your prior study of Buddhism. The five aggregates are the basis for a person. The first one, form, that is indicated in that upper left-hand side in the white area there, is the aggregate of the body, essentially, our physical aggregate. The remaining ones, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and then consciousness, which has many different facets to it, as we're going to see when we get into the last four dissolutions. Those are the five aggregates that are kind of dissolving as we go through this. Again, we can't say that they are absolutely absent, especially consciousness, because consciousness carries on. It never is completely gone. But nonetheless, these things stop having a primary role and they dissolve in the sense so that the next dissolution kind of reverts to another level of the aggregates. And then we also have correlated with that the five wisdoms. The first four are listed here in these columns. We've only gone through the first two dissolutions so far. But these wisdoms are called the basic wisdoms, meaning that they are there at the time of the base, right now in our unenlightened state. When we become a Buddha, all of these five wisdoms become manifest in their full fruition. And we have the physical elements, which we did go through, and that's the major part of what's happening in terms of a dissolution here. The earth element that's dissolving in the first dissolution means that earth is incapable of sustaining consciousness at that point, and reverts to water, which is the stronger element at that point. Then water dissolves and that reverts to fire. Fire dissolves and it reverts to wind. And then finally, the wind energies begin to dissolve in a coarser way and eventually dissolve all the way down to the subtler winds. And on the basis of those, there are corresponding consciousnesses that can no longer be maintained because the body doesn't have the capacity of doing that due to the dissolution of those elements. So, on the basis of the earth element dissolving, the eye sense power is unable to function. So, we can't open and close our eyes. Then we have the inability to detect colors and shapes. So essentially, you cannot generate your eye consciousness at that point, and according to these teachings. And you might still have some subtle visual awareness, but essentially this is a disempowering of those through this first dissolution. And then after you go through these five different types of things that are dissolving, the first five again for that first dissolution, there is an internal sign as well. This internal sign once more appears to the mind's eye. It doesn't appear to our visual consciousness. It is within the mind, and it is a mirage, sort of bluish appearance, the way that a mirage would appear on the desert. That is what is appearing to our mind's eye. For the second one, again, we had pretty much went through the first few, but the element that's dissolving at that point is water. And so there's a drying up of the body. In the first one, the body was feeling kind of heavy due to the earth element being gone. The earth is what kind of gives it sort of some level of support and cohesion. That's all gone, so the body feels like it's sinking. In the second one, the water element drying up means that fluids in the body are no longer as, you feel an extreme dryness in the body. And that is because the fire element is taking over as the main element, and that will dissolve in this next dissolution that we look at. In connection with that are the ear sense power and then the sounds, and especially this or buzzing sound in the ear that's very subtle. We can detect it when you're meditating or something in silence. There's always kind of a very subtle sound that's there. That completely ceases. The appearance to the mind's eye is a smoke-like appearance described there on the screen. So again, we've gotten through the first 10 dissolutions then, because these are in generally sets of 5. When we get to the last one, the fourth dissolution of these that deal with the physical elements, we'll see that there are actually 2 additional ones that dissolve in terms of the 2 additional consciousnesses and not consciousness, the sense power and the objects of that sense power. Because the taste consciousness dissolves as well as the tactile consciousness. Okay, so that's just to get us back into where we were. We are working with this text. We're on the page 4 of the text, I believe, and that's where this third dissolution is described. So I'm just going to go forward and go through this, and again, we'll see if there are questions a little bit later tonight. Hopefully, if you have any questions from last week, hold on to those. There'll be an opportunity to discuss those. Our text says, after that, meaning after the second dissolution, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of discriminations. Discriminations is the third aggregate, and it is the second mental one, and it pertains to the ability to discriminate, to be able to tell this is different than that, which is not at a conceptual level. It can be even at just at the way that we see something, and we can see there's a difference between blue and yellow, for example. We'll be able to discriminate those on the basis of that mental factor that is present in the mind pretty much all the time. So that aggregate dissolves with these other phenomena simultaneously. As an external sign of the dissolution of the aggregate of discriminations, one is no longer mindful of the affairs of close persons, such as one's parents. We can't discriminate anything that's going on around us, in a sense. The ability for us to discriminate, oh, this is my mother, this is my brother, this is whoever. And that follows into the wisdom that is involved at this level. The second factor that's dissolving, the basic wisdom of analysis. And it's explained to be an ordinary consciousness. In the case of our existence, it becomes one of the five wisdom consciousnesses of a Buddha upon attaining enlightenment. But it's the consciousness that is mindful of the individual names, purposes, and so forth of close persons. And I would imagine of other phenomena as well, but essentially you lose a lot of the ability to discriminate, in particular, the people who might be around you at that time as you're going through the death process. As a sign of its dissolution, one can no longer remember the names, even of one's parents, even beings that we've known our whole life. We don't have the ability to discriminate that. The third factor that is dissolving is, of course, the fire constituent. That was the one that the consciousness fell to after the water element dissolved in the previous dissolution. As an external sign of that, the warmth of the body diminishes. This is what fire is. Fire is the element that is hot and burning. It is creating warmth in the body. They say that often at this time, people get very, very cold. They begin to have a diminishment of the heat in the body so that it becomes, they want more blankets or something on top of them in order to try to keep the warmth in the body. But the fire element is dissolving, and it says there, whereupon the capacity to digest food and drink is lost. This is the power of the warmth in the body, as it enables us to have digestion. The fourth one that is dissolving is the nose sense power, and an external sign of that is that the inhalation of wind, breath through the nose is weak, whereas the exhalation is strong and lengthy, and the breaths are as if piled one on top of the other. I imagine that the idea here is that there's not this continuity, if you will. It's like we do one breath and then we kind of finish it with this long exhalation. Then we pile another one on top of it, in a sense. And then the breathing becomes much more labored, is what's really happening here. Again, there is that book that I mentioned. It's on your book list, Margaret Coberly, who has studied some of this and is a hospice nurse. And she gives some indicators from her experience of being a hospice nurse as to what else is going on at the time of these dissolutions. The fifth one, the final one for this third dissolution, is an external sign of the dissolution of the odors, the scents that are included within one's own continuum. One cannot smell any fragrant or unfragrant odors. So within our own continuum, we cannot bring to mind any particular sense. Those things may be around us at that time, but we cannot know them. Taste consciousness cannot be, nose consciousness cannot be generated. The internal sign, having gone through the five that are related to the dissolutions of those various phenomena, is the arising of an appearance called like fireflies. It's like burning red sparks seen within puffs of smoke rising from a chimney, or like red sparks on the soot on the bottom of a pan used for parching grain. Like if you're roasting grain or something, these little sparks that come up from the small bits of the grain or whatever that would be on the bottom of the pan that's very hot. So again, this is just an internal sign appearing to our mind's eye. And of course, I always remember this by like what happens when we extinguish fire, when you have an inability for the fire to be sustained, that you usually have some sort of sparks that are there that are giving off the final bits of that heat, if you will. So again, that's pretty much the same as what's in this chart. I don't know that I need to go through that. They call it, give different names here, wisdom of investigation versus analysis. We talked about those two mental factors in the last class I did on Wednesday night here earlier this year. They are different in terms of investigation being a more detailed, that's the more general one, and analysis being the more detailed way of looking at things. But nonetheless, they're both involved with getting at phenomena, which once more has to do with that aggregate of discrimination. So in the next dissolution, just as a preview, we can look on the chart here, we're going to see that the aggregate of compositional factors dissolves. What is that? That's all the other mental factors that are involved in our awareness. And the main one, sometimes they even call this fourth aggregate volition, because intention or volition is one of the main ones that is also omnipresent, that is involved in creating karma. So at this point, you have an inability to kind of act. That and many of the other mental factors, again, are all dissolving. They're incapable of being brought to mind. So the wisdom of activities, or sometimes called the wisdom of accomplishing activities, can no longer be functional. This is where the coarser winds dissolve Root and branch winds move to the heart, and the breath actually ceases at this point. Clinical death will have occurred because of that dissolution of the wind element. And then, as I said, we have the diminishment of the remaining two consciousnesses that are involved in our senses. So we had the eye consciousness incapable of being generated because the eye sense power was incapable of knowing the colors and shapes and so on. Now we get to the last two, our taste consciousness, due to the tongue sense power having been um, made incapable of knowing taste. And then the body sense power, which is our tactile sensation, and all the tactile objects no longer being able to be generated. And then, as we'll see, there's this sputtering butter lamp that's like when the wind has completely, like if you have something inside a glass jar and it's just trying to keep alive due to the fact that there's no more wind, no more air there. That's the idea behind it. And that's the sign that we'll see when we go back to the text. So let's take a look at that fourth dissolution. This is the last of, again, the physical elements or constituents. After that, the five phenomena on the level of the aggregate of compositional factors dissolve simultaneously. The external sign of the first, that aggregate, the aggregate of compositional factors, is that one cannot perform physical actions such as moving about. The body becomes like rigid, not rigid per se, but incapable of any moving, like you're paralyzed in a sense. The basic wisdom of achieving activities is explained to be a consciousness that is mindful of external worldly activities, purposes, and so forth, of this and future lives, as well as how to achieve them. As an external sign of its dissolution, one is no longer mindful of these. So it's kind of that extension, again, of so many of our mental processes, but in particular, our intention or volition. The third thing that is dissolving, phenomenon that is dissolving, is the wind constituent. And here, the 10 winds, the gross life-bearing wind and so forth, shift from their own abodes to the heart, and the breath ceases to move in and out. So again, you have that idea. Let me take it off screen for a minute. We talked about this a little bit last week in introducing this whole topic. You have 72,000 channels, pathways that the wind is flowing in the body. I don't know if that's according to all of the tantras. Again, just the mainstream tantras, this seems to be pretty common. But the three that are the most important ones in the death process, and we're going to see these coming up in the remaining four steps, are the central channel that starts just inside this point where between the eyebrows, the ajna point, kind of the third eye there. And it goes up around to the crown of the head, kind of curving like an umbrella, the handle of an umbrella, and then descends down in front of the spine and comes all the way down to the sexual organ, is what was indicated in the text. So essentially, you have this whole middle pathway that is kind of like a straw that is hollow, a hollow tube in which the energy will flow eventually, but it's constricted by the right and the left channels. The right and the left channels start just inside the nostrils, are parallel to it, and they go around at various points, creating a constriction, a channel knot. The channel knot at the crown, at the throat, at the heart, where at the heart, remember, it's got 3 times it goes around, kind of creating 6 rings in a sense, because each one wraps completely around and then wraps completely around again, and then completely around a third time. So you have this, kind of constricting at the heart in particular, where the subtlemost consciousness resides. Then you have the navel chakra, and you have the root chakra. So essentially, and then there are other chakras in some of the other systems, but you have those as the main ones where there are these constrictions. At this point in the process where the winds are dissolving, the grosser winds, they are going into the side channels. And they're going to begin the process of loosening the channel knots. As we're going to see when we get to that, initially the channel knot at the top, the crown, and then the throat are loosened enough so that the white drop, I mentioned this last week, that is residing in the middle of the crown chakra, can begin its process of descending towards the heart. Then we'll have the loosening in the lower part of the body through the winds going into the right and left channel below the heart chakra. And that causes the loosening of the root chakra and the navel chakra. And at the navel chakra is a red drop. Both of these are derived from the initial 2 drops that you got from your parents upon conception. So essentially, that drop begins to move towards the heart. They eventually meet at the heart, and then they dissolve into the indestructible drop, which again is the initial white and red drop that you got from your parents. And then that triggers the whole process of the clear light mind opening. But we're beginning to move into this process where what's happening is these continued dissolution of winds and consequently the consciousnesses that are based on them. The mind goes into these subtler processes and subtler awarenesses, and then eventually arrives at the subtlemost mind. And so this is kind of where we're moving into with this last physical dissolution. But we're only talking about these coarse winds at this point. I won't go into, again, the list of the 10. I think most of you have seen these before. His Holiness's book has them listed. I can certainly say them if you'd like to at least hear the names of these. Let me pull up my text here where I had them written in the margin. Because they weren't really in our text. I think they might be in the notes to Lottie Rinpoche's text with Jeffrey Hopkins. The first five, the five main winds, it was already mentioned the life-bearing wind, and this is one of the most important because the life-bearing wind at the grosser level is what keeps us alive, and then it dissolves into the very subtle life-bearing wind that is together with the subtlemost consciousness of the mind of clear light. The second is the upward moving, the third is the pervasive, the fourth is the fire dwelling, and the fifth is the downward voiding. These are involved in different processes in the body, downward voiding, all the things moving down through our digestion and elimination, through the urinary tract and so on. And then we have the fire dwelling in our stomach and all of that keeps the things moving through the upper part of the digestive tract. And then you have the upward moving that causes the movement upward of various energies in the body. The five secondary are all involved in our movement of the doors of the sense powers. So they kind of are involved in creating our ability to know sense objects. And they are called moving, fully moving, perfectly moving, strongly moving, and definitely moving. So they have, again, different levels of energy it seems that they're involved in. So those are the 10 that are dissolving at this point. They are grosser levels of wind, but nonetheless, very important in terms of sustaining life. And so at this point, as was said, the life has gone out of the body in terms of no longer breathing and so on. But the subtle process of the winds dissolving has yet to come. The full death process is still ahead of us rather than death being over at this point. So in that second to last paragraph at the bottom there, as an external sign of the dissolution of the tongue sense power that allows us to use our taste consciousness, the tongue becomes thick and short, kind of shortens, and its root turns blue. As an external sign of the dissolution of the tastes included within one's own continuum, whoops, went down a little too far. One can no longer experience the six tastes. These are set out in the traditional texts as to, again, we might have more that we would call different tastes, but there's essentially sweet, sour, bitter, astringent, pungent, and salty. Since at this point, the body sense power and also the tactile objects, the touches and those things that induce a tactile sensation must also dissolve for us. So we no longer will be able to feel any sort of tactile sensation. As an external sign of their dissolution, one can no longer experience any smoothness or roughness, which are the essence of our tactile sensations. So those are the 7 that dissolve at this point. And you have the regular 5 plus the 2 that pertain to our body consciousness, the tactile consciousness. The internal sign, the 4th internal sign through these dissolution of the elements or constituents, is the arising of an appearance called like a burning butter lamp. It's like the sputtering point of a butter lamp's flame when it is about to go out. So that's kind of how things are ending in regard to this. I thought it would be interesting. I don't know. Let's see if we can make this work. There's this video that I mentioned that one student in San Francisco had alerted me to. Apparently, there's a podcast that has to do with near-death experiences. And this woman is a Turkish woman who relates some of what she went through. I'm just going to play like the first 5 minutes. But she does talk about the initial stages where she's going through something very similar to what we just talked about. I'm not going to play beyond that because her experience is a little different. It's always hard to say in my mind what happens with a near-death experience as to how far in the process you go. Because once some of these winds start to dissolve and this drops start to descend, I would think it might become irreversible. You cannot come out of those processes, I would think. So it makes some sense to think that she's probably only capable of going into it at some level. But we'll go ahead and play a little bit of this because I thought it would be interesting to add in here, and I think I do have time to do that. So let me get to the full screen, and I'm going to see how this works with the volume because it's always tricky turning on the volume here, but I'll try it.
The My Near Death Experience podcast. Today, Irada Abasova shares her near death experience as surgical complication becomes the gateway to a surreal encounter with a vast void and the essence of human connection.
My name is Irada, and I am from Turkey, Istanbul, and I'm here today to share my near death experience. It happened 12 years ago, and it all began in a hospital. Basically, I was there for some a minor surgery, which was supposed to take just an hour, but everything went wrong right from the beginning. So my doctor was not there. I had to wait for a few hours, and I was kept being notified to wait a little bit more, wait more. So it was already pretty late in the evening, and I received a call asking me if I agree if another shift, another doctor helps me because my doctor is not coming, unable to come. I agreed, and so this is how it started. Basically, my doctors were not ready for this surgery. These doctors, they have just finished their shift and they were just about to leave, and suddenly they got a call that they have this one more patient quickly. So everyone is on a rush. They're preparing me for this surgery. Everyone is like rushing, everyone is talking, and no one really questions me. Like originally, I was not supposed to have any anesthesia done, and but no one is asking me. Everyone is in a rush, and it's going so fast. So no one asked me about my relationship with drugs and anesthesia. So they give me the anesthetic drug right away. They wait for the effect to show itself. So they talk to me, but there's it's not affecting me at all. So I'm basically still talking to them, absolutely clear. I don't lose sensitivity. I don't get sleepy or anything. So the doctor decides that the reason is that I'm like they calculated the dosage wrong, so they should increase the dosage. They decide, and because I'm pretty tall, and at that time I had a lot of muscle mass on my body, and they decided that they should double the dosage, which they do. The nurse injects the second dose, and it's over for me. At that moment, I'm gone. And for them, it's a disaster because the body switched off and it's not reacting. And for me, uh, what I remember is that right before I lost the perception of the hospital room, I experienced few very weird sensations. It was like the first sensation was I felt my whole body get really, really, really heavy, like a rock, and like a piece of rock. And I was very surprised. Why am I not falling through the bed, through the floor, through like why? Because I felt that's how heavy I felt. I was like supposed to push through all these surfaces, and that sensation of heaviness then was replaced by a sensation of dryness, like complete dryness. Like I felt like my whole body suddenly dried out, like all liquid was gone, not just from my mouth, but all water, all liquid is gone from the whole body. And that was very shocking, but it was all going very fast. Heavy, dry, and third one was freezing cold. I felt the whole body shivering, like all the warmth, all the fire element was gone. And it all went so fast, like heavy, dry, cold, and then the last element to leave my body, I guess, was the element of air, where I tried to breathe in, just take this one breath, and there was no air to breathe. There was no oxygen. I couldn't take that breath. And at that point, I felt I have no more power to keep perceiving this reality. That's how I felt. Like this whole reality that I was seeing, this hospital room, these doctors running, doing something in my body, it all just suddenly just dissolved, like fell apart. Like I felt no more power to keep perceiving it. Suddenly, I feel like I did not feel myself moving anywhere. Like I did not fly out of the body. I did not travel. I felt that I'm still in that same spot, at that same place. I'm still there, but everything around me disappeared. And instead of this hospital room, now I was perceiving void, just black darkness. I like
Okay, maybe that's enough to go with to give you an idea. Were you able to hear that online? Okay, good. Because yeah, I wasn't sure whether that would work, but I found that really fascinating when I first watched that video because it was the exact same process. Again, she was talking about seeing. So, I mean, maybe these consciousnesses, once more, there might be some more fluidity around that. But it does seem like the dissolutions were very similar in terms of the heaviness, then the dryness, then the coldness, and then the inability to breathe in the final step there. So, let's go back to our text and continue on. And again, what's going to be happening well, we first have a little bit more of an explanation of these things. I forgot there's an additional kind of some points of clarification that they want to make in the text, which some of these I've already talked about, so I might not need to, well, actually, there's just the one there on dissolution. I think they go into points of clarification at the end of the eighth dissolution, where they go into more detail. But in terms of the meaning of dissolution, I mentioned this last week. With respect to how the former elements, such as earth, dissolves into the latter, water, and so on, the capacity of the wind associated with the former element in the list of earth, water, fire, and wind to act as a basis of consciousness is withdrawn. Because again, when that element is withdrawn, the wind energy that is connected to that, that consciousness is together with, that allows you to have the eye consciousness at the level of the earth element, the ear consciousness at the level of the water, and so on. It's always tied to wind because wind and consciousness are there together, the wind as the mount and the consciousness mounted upon it. And it says, so can that to act as a basis of consciousness is withdrawn, and the capacity of a latter one to do so, then, to kind of take the reins, becomes more manifest. This is called the dissolution of a former element into a latter one, but is not a case of one element's becoming of the nature of other. It's not that the earth actually dissolves into water and it becomes water. The earth is simply incapable, through the wind power that is connected with the consciousness that's related to earth, to be able to act as a support for that consciousness. That earth dissolves into water means that the capacity of the earth wind then to act as a basis of consciousness degenerates, whereupon the capacity of the water wind to act as a basis of consciousness becomes more manifest. Thus, since this is like a transference of the capacity of the former to the latter, it is said that earth dissolves into water, but it is not that the ordinary earth dissolves into ordinary water. This applies to the other dissolutions as well. So again, what is happening is these wind levels that are connected to the physical elements are incapable of sustaining the consciousness that is together with them. When the physical element dissolves and when you have that diminishment of the solidity and so on of the earth element, and the body begins to have that sinking feeling and what have you, then you would have the water picking up the reins and carrying the consciousness at that level. It dissolves, and fire does the same. The fire dissolves, wind does that, and then the winds dissolve, and the grosser levels of consciousness have to cease because there's no more winds for them to be sustained. So again, that's what's happening up to this point. Beyond this point, we are looking at, again, a subtler process that is occurring involving the things I mentioned earlier, the channels, drops, these additional winds that begin to dissolve into the central channel and so on. So as it says there, after the four elements dissolve, the five phenomena on the level of the aggregate of consciousness must dawn in stages, because we're going into these subtler levels of consciousness. Consciousness is the fifth aggregate. And it generally is referring to the main consciousnesses we have. The 5 sense consciousnesses have all fallen away. The 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, is divided in 2 parts. These 5, as it says there in reading again from that first paragraph, are 1, the mind of the 80 indicative conceptions. These are detailed out in the appendix to our text. Secondly, the mind of radiant white appearance, which is what's going to appear in the end of this or in this dissolution. The mind of radiant red increase, the white appearance dissolves and red increase appears. The mind of radiant black near attainment, when the red increase dissolves and that one appears. And then the mind of the clear light of death, which is where it all ends up, in that subtlemost mental state. The mind of the 80 indicative conceptions and the wind which serves as its mount must dissolve prior to the radiant white appearance, because its mode of apprehension and that of the mind of white appearance are discordant. In other words, you have to, kind of in the same way that for the water consciousness or the water winds to be supporting its consciousness, the earth wind has to dissolve, and so on. So you have this, again, a necessity of the first dissolution in this remaining set of 4 to have to occur for the white appearance to be there. The 80 indicative conceptions. Let me go ahead and take you to, I'm on page 5 here. Let me go to the appendix way at the back here. You have a listing of these. There they are. I'm not going to go through them all. The 80 indicative conceptions, again, are these, they're indicative of the 3 levels that are coming, the mind of white appearance, red increase, and black near attainment, and they're divided into 3 groups, but they all dissolve at this first of these remaining 4 levels when we go into the mind of white appearance. And again, there's a list of them. They talk about them here and there, but I don't think it's really, that important for us to go through them all and understand all of those. So again, let's go back to where we were in the text. Also, since there is a great difference of, this is about in the center of the screen, also, since there is a great difference of coarseness and subtlety between these 2, meaning the 80 indicative conceptions, that mind, as well as the mind of white appearance, coarse minds such as those of the 80 conceptions cannot exist at the time of the white appearance. And because once the white appearance is manifest, there's no ability, no winds that would even be able to support that. When the 80 indicative conceptions, as well as the wind that serves as their mount, begin to dissolve into the radiant white appearance, an appearance like a burning butter lamp arises. The sign of the mind of clear of appearance itself, when those 80 indicative conceptions have dissolved into it, is the dawning of extreme clarity and vacuity, as well as of light with a white aspect like a night sky pervaded by moonlight in the autumn when the sky is free of defilement. We're going to talk later about why autumn moons are used, so I won't go into that at this moment. But this white appearance is what is the internal sign that is occurring in this the beginning of these last 4 dissolutions. So essentially, the internal signs towards the center of the screen there, the arisal of a brilliant white appearance, like moonlight pervading a vacuous autumn sky, and the empty appearance. This is the first of what are called the 4 empties. Those of you who studied the Tantric course with me know that these 4 empties can be induced through Tantric practice, but at death they happen naturally. The first one is called empty appearance because it is empty of the indicative conceptions, the mind of the 80 indicative conceptions. Then the next one will be called very empty, the third one great empty, and the fourth one all empty, because they become empty of what preceded them, the various subtle minds that have kind of appeared at that point. So in terms of what's kind of dissolving at this point, we have that 5th aggregate, the mind of consciousness, that is going to begin the process now of dissolving. Remember, I pointed out what was in our text that we have 5 different levels. First, the indicative conceptions, the mind of that, and then we have white appearance, red increase, black near attainment, and finally the mind of clear light. The mental sense power is also, of course, in a process of dissolving to some degree, not becoming completely absent, but becoming subtler and subtler. Mental sense power refers to not the brain or something, it's referring to the power of the previous moment of consciousness to give rise to a subsequent moment. So that's what we depend upon for our mental consciousness to appear. Then the one in the middle there, the wisdom that is involved with this is called the wisdom of the sphere or the nature of phenomena, which eventually becomes the truth body of a Buddha. So that, again, is dissolving in terms of it becoming subtler and subtler. It's not that you ever have a complete absence of these three. They just, the coarser ways in which they are appearing fall away until you arrive at the subtlest consciousness, together with its basis wisdom of the sphere of phenomena that can be transmuted into the truth body of a Buddha, the dharmakaya of a Buddha. And then the mental sense power, of course, is always there on the basis of continuing to give rise to future moments of consciousness throughout this process. So we've gone through kind of the first one. There's a little bit more in our text to finish this off. Let me go to what's on the bottom of the screen there. Let me take that to the top. Whoops, went just too far. It is called appearance because, oh wait, I didn't go into that other side. I'm sorry, let's go to the top there. With respect to the cause of such an appearance, all the winds in the right and left channels above the heart have entered the central channel through its upper opening at the top of the head. Through the force of this, the knot of the channels at the top of the head, the crown chakra, that's loosened. And since the white drop obtained from the Father, which has the aspect of the syllable ham upside down, has the nature of water, it comes downward. When it arrives on top of the six-circled knot of the right and left channels at the heart, the radiant white appearance arises. So again, it didn't mention the throat chakra also loosening, but that loosens. So you have the ability for that white drop to descend down through the central channel and arrive at the top of the six-circled knot of the heart chakra. So when it arrives there, excuse me, at the top of the right and left channels at the heart, the radiant white appearance arises. Thus, this is not a case of an appearance of moonlight and so forth shining from the outside. It's once more an internal appearance to kind of our mind's eye. It is called appearance because an appearance like moonlight dawns, and it's called the empty, the first of the four empties, because of being devoid of the 80 conceptions, as well as the wind that serves as their mount. So again, this is the initial stage. So some of these, the coarser levels of conceptual awareness always being in our mental consciousness, those fall away. And we have very subtle conceptual minds that are arising, that are these three, the white appearance, red increase, and black near attainment, that we're going to see in the first three of these stages we've already seen, again, the white one. The sixth dissolution. After that, the mind of appearance, meaning in white appearance, as well as the wind that serves as its mount, dissolves into the mind of red increase. When the mind of increase dawns, a red or orange appearance, empty and vacuous, but much clearer than before, shines like an autumn sky, free of defilement and pervaded by sunlight. With respect to its cause, all the winds in the right and left channels below the heart have entered the central channel through its lower opening at the base of the spine or in the sexual organ. Through the force of this, the knot of the channel wheel in the jewel, sexual organ, and the knot of the channel wheel at the navel gradually loosen. Thereby, the red drop that is obtained from the mother, which exists in the form of the single vertical line of a short ah in Sanskrit when added to make a long ah. I don't know exactly what that is, but anyway, that's just a very, kind of a line, I believe, again, that says there's a single vertical line. In the middle of the channel wheel at the navel, the chakra at the navel, comes upward until it arrives below the six-circled knot of the right and left channels at the heart. A red or orange appearance arises. Thus, this is once more not a case of the illumination of sunlight and so forth shining from outside. It is called increase of appearance, a red increase, because of being very vivid like sunlight, and the very empty because of being devoid of the mind of white appearance, as well as the wind that serves as its mount. So again, we have this process that's unfolding in terms of the subtle physiology of the body that's going on, that's inducing certain appearances. Again, it kind of makes sense if you say at this point, kind of your consciousness is together with this process, but the winds are becoming subtler and subtler. So you're kind of having the appearance that is correlated with the particular phenomena that are going on, which is the white drop descending induces the white appearance when it meets, or comes to the just above the heart chakra. Then you have the red drop that is arising, and you have the red increase. I don't think we have to think of it as like a really deep red. It's sort of the reddish hue that is in the sky that is there again in certain times of day. We're going to see again why they're referring to this autumn sky. It has a lot to do with the clarity of that sky at that time of year, especially in India, where you have like a lot of kind of rains and dirt and so on during the summer, and then it all sort of clears up in the fall. On to the seventh dissolution. After that, the mind of red increase, together with the wind that serves as its mount, because everything once more, the consciousness and the mount dissolve together, the wind. That dissolves into the mind of what's often called black near attainment, meaning this kind of dark state of mind that occurs here. During the first part of this mind of near attainment, there dawns a vacuous black appearance, like an autumn sky free of defilement and pervaded by the thick darkness of the beginning of night. We're going to see that later in it, there's a kind of a swoon, but the initial part of it is a black appearance. The upper and lower winds inside the central channel at this point have gathered within that channel at the heart. And through the force of these winds coming together, the six-circled knot, again, the three from each side, each one wraps around one time or three times. So the right and the left make a six-circled knot at the heart, is loosened. Whereupon the white drop that is above in the aspect of the syllable hum upside down, and that descends, and the red drop that is below in the aspect of this vertical line ascends. These enter into the middle of the white and red indestructible drops that exist in the manner of a closed case in the center of the central channel at the heart. Once more, you have the white drop on the top, the red drop on the bottom. This is the indestructible drop that are the original two drops you received from your parents at conception, from the sperm and the egg, respectively. Those are called indestructible because they remain there until death. And they are the house, the seat of the subtlemost mind, the clear light mind, together with its mount, the subtle life-bearing wind. Okay, so then it says, due to their meeting, I'm not sure exactly how this is physiologically. How are they meeting when they haven't entered into the drops? It says they enter into, but they don't dissolve into. I don't know exactly what that means. But due to their meeting to some degree at that point, the radiant appearance of near attainment arises, this black near attainment. Thus, it is not a case of an appearance of darkness and so forth coming from the outside. Once again, they just are emphasizing this is an internal appearance. But it's kind of like they must be in some way almost encasing and causing a darkness to occur in respect to our subtlemost consciousness. It's called near attainment because of being near the clear light. And it's very close to clear light. It's the last step before clear light mind manifests. And it's called the great empty because of being devoid of the mind of increase, as well as the wind that serves as its mount. So it's the third of the four empties. So, as I said earlier, the first part of the mind of near attainment is accompanied by a sense of an object, meaning the black, appearance that is occurring. But during the latter part, one is not mindful of any object, as if swooning unconsciously, confounded in darkness. Then all the winds and minds that adventitiously arise from the very subtle wind and mind cease. So you have a cessation of all of those because you no longer have any winds that are active in the body, in the subtle body or gross body. And what will manifest is the mind of clear light, which will be together with its very subtle wind. But this is what's happening at the very end of that mind of black near attainment. The latter portion of the mind of near attainment without mindfulness continues until the mindfulness of the very subtle wind and mind, which has existed non-manifestly from the beginning in the ordinary state, is activated. When that occurs, the clear light of death dawns. Okay, so Stephen has a question here in the Gampa. Again, if any of you have a question at this point, because when we come back, we're going to go through the definitions that are set out for those three minds, and then we'll go on to the mind of clear light. Let's see what Stephen's question is.
Yeah, thanks, Don. I've got a multi-part question.
Multi-part question. Okay.
I heard that, Lou. So here when it says, then all the winds and minds that adventitiously arise from the very subtle wind and mind cease. So that's saying that the gross winds and the coarse winds and the subtle winds have stopped.
Mhm.
And now it's the very subtle wind that's now kind of manifest because those aren't. That's what
Well,
it's saying.
it's saying that they are falling away at the very end of it, so that
Right.
then the mind of clear light and its subtle wind can be made manifest. Yes.
And when it says here, the latter portion of the mind of near attainment without mindfulness, does that mean there is no object? It's not mindful of any object. It's not that there's no mindfulness.
Yeah. It seems so. It seems so that there's kind of a lack of awareness of any object. There's just this kind of void space or
Yeah.
something that we are abiding in, which again is hard to describe, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because normally you say that consciousness has
Yeah.
to have an object.
Yeah.
Without it, there's no consciousness.
But I mean, again, maybe they're just meaning that you don't really have any awareness of it in a way that you could have any recollection,
Like an
you know,
inattentive.
because it's saying mindfulness. Mindfulness is sometimes called recollection. Like you don't have an
Yeah.
ability to be aware of what you're being aware of. Because when we talk about even when you go into the mind that directly realizes emptiness, we often say that you can pick it apart and say there is the object emptiness that is being realized by the mind that is directly knowing it. But the sense is that those two things become like water poured into water. So there's no real duality of subject and object at that point.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of what it's getting at here is you're kind of moving into that
Okay.
space where there's no conceptuality that's going to be present. So you cannot have kind of a differentiation of subject and object.
Yeah. I was just kind of thinking more just about unconscious, like when you're put to sleep by a doctor or you pass out or something and there's just nothing.
There's just nothing. I mean, there is that element to it, I'm sure, because of the way it describes it as like a swoon.
Yeah.
Like if you've ever have fainted where you just feel like you lose all of that kind of awareness of anything and wake up and you go, wow, what happened?
I get here.
How did I get here?
And maybe you'd say, this is just coming up in the next sentence.
Uh-huh.
But the first item says, which occurs upon the dissolution of the conceptions until their movement, that is their reinstatement. So I'm a little bit confused about the 80 conceptions, and do they just like completely go away after the fifth, or do they come back in groups as they're segregated in the appendix, or how does that work?
No. Let me explain that in terms of these definitions, because reinstatement is a weird word here. But I don't think reinstatement means that they come back. They come back later, of course, when you go out of this process. Once more, when we get to the intermediate state, we see that it goes into reversal. So you started with clear light, go into the clear light of death, and then when you come back out, you generate these grosser levels of consciousness all the way back into, again, in the mind of an intermediate state being. We'll talk about that when we get to that, but I'll talk about that in a moment because I don't think it means that they're reinstated at that time. You do have the ability to have them reinstated later or anything, but in this process, once they have fallen away, and it seems that they do not recur within that lifetime that this death process is occurring in. Yes, did you have a question, Don, or comment?
Thank you for teaching again, Don. Thank you.
Sure.
So grateful. Do all the schools agree on the death process?
In the Tibetan tradition, yes. I mean, again, this is.
Whoa.
I think there's agreement on that. I haven't, again, in the Nyingma tradition, I know that they rely heavily upon the Tibetan Book of the Dead and use it quite frequently when people are dying. So my understanding is that all of this is derived from that, and that it's again, I can't say definitively that, but it's my understanding. So, I haven't talked to each tradition and found out exactly what they say around this. But it seems like it's common because the tantras are common. They might practice slightly different tantras or put emphasis on certain tantras in different of the 4 lineages, but they are all deriving from the tantric teachings. And so I think they would have the same understanding of subtle physiology and what have you. Now, again, this is within what we call mainstream highest yoga tantra. As I pointed out at the very beginning of last week, there are 4 levels of tantra. You don't talk about these subtle winds and so on in the lower tantras. It's just not discussed. It's not part of what they work with. And highest yoga tantra is where they're introduced. And so I know there's highest yoga tantra in the Nyingma tradition, and I'm pretty sure it's in the Kagyu as well as the Sakya tradition. So essentially all 4 of those, the understanding is that they have highest yoga tantra, so they would be relying on probably very similar, pretty much identical teachings around the death process. When you get to something like Kalachakra Tantra, which we touched on briefly in the Tantra course, then the physiology is very different. And it's not practiced in the same manner and so on. So this is, again, what we'd be talking about in general, this death process that is simulated for tantric practitioners and is actualized for, I think, all humans when they attain that subtlemost mind and so on. Was there more than Dawn or?
There, so this is like we're training for this, like this is the most important.
To some degree, it is important that we have some awareness of this and that we kind of simulate it in our own meditation. And I will put out on the Google Drive where I've got the materials, a meditation that comes from Discovering Buddhism, where you can kind of go through these and replicate them. And it's very brief, so you might bring to mind other things that we've talked about in this teaching in terms of the consciousnesses that are dissolving and so on. But it's good to kind of make it a rehearsal for death. And
Like in our sadhana, we're doing it every day.
now, again, those of you who have highest yoga tantra practice that you're doing, when you get to where you are going to do your deity yoga, which is where you arise in the form of the Buddha that you've been empowered to practice, then you go through this dissolution in terms of the 3 bodies. So the first one is the death process that brings you to this mind of clear light, and then you try to meditate on emptiness. This Mahamudra, the Great Seal, and you induce that state of mind as best as you can, because that's going to bring about the body of the dharmakaya, the truth body. Then when you get to the next one where you're taking rebirth, and that's coming out of that process, and usually in the sadhana, it's like through a seed syllable or some sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, it's some sort of that we're visualizing as kind of a seed essence or something.
Yeah.
That would be the second one where you're bringing to mind the sambogakaya, which is the enjoyment body. And then when you think about kind of moving out of that into birth, which in this case is not birth into another existence in samsara, it's birth into the nirmanakaya, which is the emanation body, which is the form of the Buddha that you've been initiated into, Yamantaka or whatever the case might be. So yeah.
When we do that and we're doing our visualization, sometimes like when we've had like group discussion around it, like when we were doing Yamantaka discussion, David Kamiko, I think it seemed like some people can't visualize it very well, and maybe that we have different attributes, like if you're a really visual person or not. I was just wondering if you know of any like artists or people that have tried to sort of simulate that process for the people that can't quite visualize it.
I don't know of any.
Okay.
Maybe
I have
there's
this
anyone who
fantasy
has.
of making like an installation art piece of like the death process,
I mean, yeah, I don't recall ever seeing anything,
Mhm.
but if I do come across anything, I'd be happy to share it with everyone. Because, yeah, maybe you can find something on YouTube. I don't know. Maybe somebody out there, some Buddhist practitioner who's done this. I don't know. Anyway, we did have a question in the chat box too. Thanks for your question, Don. How is it that all the incredible detailed descriptions of the different processes and death and then the Bardo, etc., have come to us in this realm. I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, obviously it's through the kindness of the Buddha, but we do have the karma for that. I think I may have mentioned, I know I did in the Tantric course, they say that we're in an eon of 1,000 Buddhas, this fortunate eon, where over the course of many, many eons of time, we're going to have the appearance of all these different Buddhas. We're only at the fourth Buddha of these 1,000 Buddhas, which is, a good reason for optimism. Let's put it that way. The fourth is, of course, Shakyamuni Buddha. The fifth is Maitreya Buddha that's going to appear sometime down the road. But they say that only 3 of these 1,000 Buddhas will teach Tantra. Buddha Shakyamuni is one who taught Tantra. And they say Lama Tsongkhapa, I think he's going to be like the 11th or something like that of this chain of Buddhas. He's going to also teach Tantra, but I don't know who the third one is after that. But essentially, these teachings, we have incredible good fortune to be able to access this description of what goes on and the tantric teachings that are built up on the basis of those that understanding. So we're in an amazing situation right now in this human life. That's more impetus for us to do what we can to first practice sutra really well. So we have the good grounding in sutra, particularly, again, the 3 principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and then the correct view of emptiness. On the basis of those, to obtain initiation, empowerment into a highest yoga tantra practice eventually. You can certainly do the lower tantras if you wish, but the main one to get is highest yoga tantra, because that's the one where you work with this incredible subtle physiology that we have that can allow you to access the mind of clear light and attain enlightenment in just 3 years, 3 months of this lifetime. So again, I can't answer it in detail, but it's karmically a product of what we've been able to create in this world. To first have the karma for the Buddha to appear 2,500 years ago in this world, and then to be not just a Buddha who's going to teach sutra, but a Buddha who's teaching tantra, to give us all of this, detailed process and so on. So I hope that answers your question, Mary Beth. But I can't say much more because I don't really know beyond that. It's always hard to explain how do these things happen. But karma's got to be involved. Let's carry on. Let's go to, again, we have a little insert here in regard to this. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to clarify what Stephen was asking about. We have a definition of each of these 3 minds that we've just talked about, the 5th through the 7th dissolutions. The definition of a mind of radiant white appearance is a mental consciousness which occurs upon the dissolution of the conceptions and until their movement. And it says that is reinstatement. Again, we can say that this is when their kind of movement is ending, the dissolution. And we could say that the mind of white appearance is there in a non-manifest way until they're reinstated. But I don't think, again, that that's what it's meaning, is that the mind of white appearance is remaining there until, in a manifest way, until the 80 indicative conceptions are, reinstated. It means that essentially they have fallen away. And we could say again that you have these subtler minds that are appearing in this process, but they aren't really manifest once their power to maintain that, once the wind that they're built upon, that they are mounted on, falls away. And it says there, secondly, to which an appearance of radiant white vacuity dawns, which is like an autumn sky, free of defilement and pervaded by moonlight. And 3, the third part of the definition, to which no other coarse dualistic appearance appears. So again, it's saying that this is why I think this whole idea of it being something related to being reinstated can't possibly be a correct way of doing it. You notice that is in brackets, so it's not. Yes, Stephen, were you going to share something? That you have the microphone?
Thank you. Just in the appendix, at the end of the first paragraph,
Okay.
it talks about that the inference about the mind of white appearance can be drawn because the first group of conceptions is an imprint or effect of the mind of white appearance when proceeding in the reverse order from the subtler to the grosser states.
All right.
So to me, that implies that's happening in tantric practice, where you're coming back from the mind of clear light in reverse order
Yeah, but again, but I guess the point is that I'm trying to make is that I don't think that we can say that it's being reinstated before then. But we won't also say that the mind of white appearance, let me take it off of this slide for the moment so people can not just be seeing the words in front of them. That what would happen is that you have that white appearance that is going to manifest at this point when the 80 indicative conceptions and the winds that are their mount have fallen away, dissolved. But it's not that the white appearance then stays and that it's there until it's reinstated, because that's what it seems to be saying. But that just doesn't seem to make sense to me, because once more, it's no longer going to be able to be there once the mind of red increase and its wind, its mount manifest. Because it's so weird. Although this book is nice in terms of it provides the translation, it doesn't provide much more than that. Lati Rinpoche's commentary is really quite scant. So I don't have a lot to go on. And even my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, when he taught on this in Italy, he didn't really go into a whole lot of a description of what that means. He says in his talking about this one, he says the definition of radiant white appearance is a mental consciousness that occurs until the movement and dissolution of the conceptions, to which there is the appearance of white vacuity like the autumn sky free from defilement, and to which no other coarse dualistic appearance appears. I don't know, again. In other words, all that appears to it is a radiant white vacuity. That's the best I could make of it, as an understanding of that. But yes, you're right. When you get to the reverse process, after you've gone down to the mind of clear light and you begin to move in the reverse process, then black near attainment will manifest, red increase will manifest, white appearance will manifest. So there is a reinstatement of it at that point, but I can't really read it in the literal way that it seems to be saying, because it doesn't make sense. If I'm totally off on this, I apologize, but this is from my understanding from having studied this in a variety of settings. Let's go on to the second one. It has the same type of thing. It says here the definition of a mind of increase of appearance, this red increase, is a mental consciousness which occurs upon the dissolution of the conceptions and until their movement, reinstatement, to which an appearance of radiant red vacuity dawns, which is like an autumn sky free of defilement and pervaded by sunlight, and to which no other coarse dualistic appearance appears. The third definition is almost identical, except it's talking about what occurs at this level. It's a mental consciousness which occurs upon the dissolution of the conceptions, meaning the conceptions correlated to the prior mind, the mind of red increase, because those are conceptual minds, albeit very subtle conceptuality, and until their movement or reinstatement, to which an appearance of radiant black vacuity dawns, which is like an autumn sky, free of defilement and pervaded by the thick darkness of the beginning of night, into which no other coarse dualistic appearance appears. So that's the best I can do with that. When I came across that in preparing for tonight, I was like, I can't really figure it out. And I couldn't really find a definitive, resource that kind of explained it. But it does seem that what's happening is you are, maybe again, it's like that it's there in a non-manifest way until its reinstatement. But what is manifesting in the mind are each of these consecutively. First, that mind of white appearance, it falls away. Then secondly, the mind of red increase. And then thirdly, the mind of black near attainment. Once that falls away, then we end up at that fourth and subtlemost mind, the mind of clear light. So this is the eighth dissolution, when that dissolving of that mind of black near attainment occurs. Let's go ahead and go through that. And as I said, there's a number of things that come up after this that go into more explanations to clarify points on the subtler process that we've been going through tonight. When the mind of near attainment dissolves into the clear light, the second portion of the mind of near attainment that is without mindfulness is cleared away. Again, that swoon or whatever that is occurring, that clears away. And without even the slightest coarse dualistic appearance, an appearance of very clear vacuity dawns. It is like the natural color of a dawn sky in autumn, free of the three causes of pollution: moonlight, sunlight, and darkness. This appearance is like that of a consciousness in meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. Again, it's not saying that it is a mind of meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness, because if it was, hey, we'd already be realizing emptiness and having, been liberated and enlightened because of this. It's similar to that, and I think by that they are referring to the fact of what I was saying, that the appearance is kind of like that merging of the mind, like water into water, where there's no longer any dualism at all of subject and object. Next paragraph, with respect to the cause of the clear light appearance, once more going back to the subtle physiology at the heart chakra, the white and red drops dissolve respectively into the white and red indestructible drops at the heart. Again, the white on top, red on the bottom. And all the winds inside the central channel dissolve into the very subtle life-bearing wind. Through this, the very subtle wind and mind that have existed in the ordinary state from the beginning, in a non-manifest state, are made manifest, whereby this appearance dawns, this mind of clear light. Thus, there's not a case again of an appearance of vacuous sky from the outside. This is all happening within our, again, mind's eye, if you will, the inner awareness that is manifesting at that time. This is called the clear light of death and the all empty, the fourth empty, because of being devoid of the 80 conceptions and of white appearance, red increase, and black near attainment, as well as of the winds that serve as their mounts. It is actual death. So this is the moment where we would say death has occurred. You're in the death process, though, because you can stay in the mind of clear light for some time. We'll talk about that shortly. This is the basic truth body, meaning at the time of the base, not that it is the actual truth body at the resultant state, but it's so called, as it says here, because it is the basis of purification to be transformed into a truth body. This is the first basic body, in other words. First basic body is the mind of clear light that manifests at the moment of death, when the full process has gone on. And it is what can be transformed into the first body of a Buddha, the truth body of a Buddha, by practitioners who are ready to use that process in that manner. Continuing, it says the vacuity is called the basic nature body, and the mind that takes it as its object is called the basic realization, wisdom, truth body. This is just going into further division. I didn't put that one up there, but that chart I showed you last week, remember I told you to focus on kind of the area where there were three bodies. There were the two form bodies, the rupakaya, which we're going to talk about later. And then there was the wisdom, or the truth body, the dharmakaya. It can be divided down into two more. It can be divided into the wisdom truth body, the jnana dharmakaya, which is the actual wisdom mind of a Buddha. And then what's called the svabhavikakaya, which is the nature body, which is essentially the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha, but also the negation, the absence of all of the obscurations that the Buddha has abandoned upon attaining that state. So it's just a subtler way of talking about the two elements involved in what's called the dharmakaya. We're working with three bodies here again, the sambogakaya, nirmanakaya, and dharmakaya. But dharmakaya itself can be talked about in terms of two elements or two parts to it. One of them that is the mind of the Buddha, and the other that is, again, the emptiness of that mind, as well as the cessation of all of these obscurations. So going back to that paragraph, it's saying that the vacuity is called the basic nature body, in other words, the emptiness of that mind. And the mind that takes it as its object is called the basic realization, wisdom, truth body. But again, both of those are basic. They have not yet become the dharmakaya of a Buddha, its corresponding emptiness. But this is what we studied back in the text. Some of you were there for that when I was teaching on Buddha nature, where we essentially talk about how we have two elements to our Buddha nature. We have the developmental lineage that eventually becomes the kind of compounded bodies of a Buddha, the dharmakaya, the wisdom dharmakaya, and the form bodies and so on. But then we have the emptiness of the mind that becomes the nature truth body. Because our minds are empty of inherent existence, we can transform them. So yes, Stephen, you wanted to.
Yeah, thanks again, Don. Just so I'm sure here, those are the three bodies then. The basic truth body, and then its two subdivisions are the three basic bodies.
No. So the basic truth body is one of the three. Sambogakaya and nirmanakaya are the other two. When we talk about the title of this course, the three basic bodies are the first we bring into the process of death, the truth body, the dharmakaya, then into the process of rebirth, the sambogakaya, and then into the process of birth, the nirmanakaya. Again, those are the enjoyment body and the emanation body, respectively, those two. So again, we'll get to those in the full presentation of the three, but what's being talked about here is that you can say, because we sometimes talk about the four bodies of a Buddha. And so this is just giving you that breakdown in terms of what is happening at this mind of clear light that is called the Dharmakaya, consists of really two things that we're going to just simply call Dharmakaya. The wisdom mind of the Buddha that we eventually will attain, we have the basis right now. And then, of course, the emptiness of that mind, which will become the nature truth body, which we have the basis for right now. Hope that wasn't too confusing for everyone. But the most important thing to remember, we're working with the first of these three bodies in the death process, which we're calling again the truth body or dharmakaya, which we can talk about mainly as being the wisdom mind of a Buddha. Looks like we've run out of time. We got like 5 minutes. Let me finish this little bit here, and we'll go to the points of clarification next week when we resume. We may end up having to abbreviate some of these sections with the classes that I have, taking maybe a little longer to explain some of these, but I think it's really important, especially for the death process, to understand these. The first full paragraph on the screen: most ordinary humans remain in the clear light for 3 days, and they often just say up to 3 days, because most beings don't have any awareness of using it for anything, and they might get stirred out of that, and very quickly, very easily. Often in our culture, we move bodies right away. That can cause a disruption in this process. Then it says, whereupon the signs of the white and red constituents occur, which are when the white continues down to the opening of the secret organ, where it will appear upon death having been completed. And then the red continues its ascent and ends up coming out of the nose. I might mention that Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in his writing about this, let me just share this real quickly. He talks about, I mentioned this last week, that for people with a female body, a body that was born with that gender, that it actually occurs in an opposite manner, so that you have the red drop that goes down through and shows at the tip of the sexual organ, and the white drop coming out through the nose. This is the section called Signs of Death. When the mind leaves the body of a man, the white bodhicitta continues down the central channel and leaves through the sex organ, and the red continues up and leaves through the nostrils. In a woman, the white bodhicitta goes up and leaves through the nostrils, and the red bodhicitta goes down and leaves through the organ. This is the final sign that the mind has left the body, the actual death, which is again when the death process is over at that point. Clear light of mind is the death of full dissolution of everything, and then you have the kind of end of death and the movement of the consciousness out of the body, and those two signs will occur potentially. Not in all bodies, though, as it says. And there are other signs that we'll talk about next week as to when we can tell, perhaps in observing someone, whether the consciousness has left the body. Here's our exception. However, in cases where the physical constituents have been severely consumed by disease, the signs of the red and white constituents do not occur no matter how many days pass. They're just not capable of moving, I would assume, because of the deterioration in the body. Also, it is said that yogis with higher and lower realization can mix the clear light with the truth body and remain in this for a greater or lesser number of extra days. We're going to see this being referred to as mixing the mother clear light with the sun clear light. The idea being that we have the mind of clear light that's manifesting naturally for all of us, but it can be combined with the wisdom realizing emptiness. And yogis can abide in that state for quite some time. Some of you saw that we had the good news recently that my teacher, Geshe Japa Gyatso in Italy, his reincarnation has finally been identified. He showed the aspect of passing away in November of 2007. But it said he would actually stayed in that mind of clear light for a week, which was pretty astounding. But he was in maybe I'll talk about these signs real quick. He was sitting in a meditation posture when he passed away. They say that another sign that the consciousness has left is that there might be a slouching to the body at that point. Another way that you can tell, and this is good if you're working with somebody who wants the body to be undisturbed. If you're working with, somebody who doesn't have these beliefs, then you might have to work around that. But you say if you feel very gently in this area where the heart chakra is, which is again just right between, right where where the breastbone is, right at the level of the heart. You can feel some warmth there, especially just after someone passes, but it will continue to have some warmth as long as the consciousness is there. So it's good to have maybe like one person do that at the beginning so they get an idea of the warmth that is generated at that place in the heart center. When the consciousness has left, it will feel cold. There will be no more heat that is there. That actually happened with Rowena. When Rowena, our former director here, passed away, I was there and Geshe-la was there, and we were both trying to figure out, I had been touching this point, and there was a warmth even on the one time where it looked like there was a red drop that had appeared, but nonetheless, we kept her another day or so, and then it was definitely cold. So that's another sign. Another thing is if you're very familiar with that person and you've been there through this process, you can probably sense when the consciousness is left. That may be, again, your last resort. This feels like there's some shift, some change. But after 3 days, if you haven't seen a sign or aren't sure of a sign, then what you do is you try to tug. If there's hair up here, try to tug back with the hair to pull it back and up. And if there's no hair there, then at least tap on this point at the crown chakra here. And that kind of induces the consciousness to leave. You do that before you move the body. Ideally, you keep the body still for 3 days. If you need to put dry ice around it to, not have any sort of deterioration of the body and so on, you do that. And that's a time that's very rich for doing practice in the presence of that person whose body is there while they're going through the subtle death process. But maybe, again, course isn't meant to talk about all this sort of stuff. In many of our other courses on death and dying, we do go into all these practices around death and dying. When we come back next week, I will finish off this section on death with the little bits that are clarifying points, and then we'll go on to rebirth, and then we'll conclude again, to intermediate state, and then we'll go on to rebirth. Any final comments or questions tonight? We're already about a minute over, but was it clear enough for my explanation and what we went through? Again, the text is fairly clear, but there are still these subtle points that it's kind of hard to get our heads around. And once more, there's just not enough commentary from some of these teachers. Even my teacher in Italy, he didn't really give, that detailed of commentary on what's all going on there. But it at least piques our curiosity around death, right? At least if we're curious rather than being fearful, that's a good thing. Maybe we can be more anticipating death by the time we finally get there. So, all right. Okay, let's go ahead. If there's no other questions or comments, let's go ahead and do our dedication prayers. Put those on the screen. And I need to move this so it's not in my way. And page down. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all sentient beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then the prayer Bodhicitta. May the supreme jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And we'll do the prayer for His Holiness's long life and the fulfillment of his wishes, for his good health and so on. As we're reciting that prayer at the top of the screen, think that we're creating the causes not just for him to have these results, but for all of our other gurus and teachers who are abiding in this world right now. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And we'll do the full prayer for Rinpoche's swift return. We're coming up very quickly on his the anniversary, 2 years since he showed the aspect of passing away. So it's important that we keep this energy going as much as we can so that his reincarnation can be identified and we can benefit once more from his presence in this world. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Lastly, we dedicate for the beings we're holding in our hearts, whether they're beings that we know who are going through specific problems and difficulties, or even parts of the world where there's great suffering, such as in Myanmar and Thailand with the earthquakes that happen there, or in Gaza, what have you, all the various parts of the world where there's harm due to humans harming each other or to the natural elements, what have you. Think about these beings and send this positive energy out to them. Have it become the cause immediately to remove their suffering and to bring them all of what will cause them to create the greatest happiness, to be attaining the state of Buddhahood. I think that we're sending this positive energy out to them with those thoughts. And also, may this occur for all beings through what we've done here tonight, their complete elimination of suffering and the complete fulfillment of their potential for total bliss, happiness, Buddhahood. Okay, thank you all for joining. Sorry if it went a little bit over, but hopefully not as bad as it could have been. So, all right, everyone, take care. I'll see you again next Tuesday. Okay, be well. By the way, I am starting some classes on Sunday here. Those of you who are curious, I'm going to do like 4 separate classes each Sunday in April. Those are coming up. But anyway, hope to see some of you then as well. Take care. Be well. Bye-bye. Thanks.